Good evening. I'm Amy Robinson, and welcome to Ask the Specialist. Tonight we ask the funeral home directors on CMU Public TV. Welcome back, and this is kind of a special night for us. It's been years since we've had funeral home directors on Ask the Specialist, and so this is your opportunity to ask them questions about issues surrounding funerals, whatever might be on your mind. We do have a new phone number this evening, so please make note of that on the screen, and we invite you to call in with your questions. Let me introduce our guests. First, Ralph Barry from Barry Funeral Home in Shepherd. Welcome. Tell me how long you've been in the business.
I've owned the funeral home for 45 years. Since 1969.
All right. Well, thank you for being here tonight. And our other guest coming in from the cold tonight is Charles Lux with the Charles Lux Family Funeral Home in Mount Pleasant. And what is your background?
My background is about half as much as Ralph. So I've been licensed for about 23 years.
And how long has your family been in the business?
Since 1975, we moved to Mount Pleasant.
Okay, very good. Well, welcome to both of you. And I hear the phone's ringing already, and that's good news. And we have some questions to get started with. Let's first of all orient everyone. Ralph, if you could tell us, broadly speaking, or in detail, what do funeral home directors do?
Well, in a small town, we wear a lot of different hats. We're volunteers on many different functions. In Shepherd, of course, we have the Maple Syrup Festival. I'm active in that. Active in your local church, or and then your work, what we do every day. And every day it's something a little different. We might be mowing the lawn one day, or trimming the shrubs, or doing some painting, or doing funeral work.
Jack of all trades.
That's right.
So, and Charles, that, you know, community involvement sounds really quite important in your business, because people want kind of that personal touch. And when that time comes, you know, for end of life issues and for planning a funeral, what kind of, how do you pull it all together? What are you able to do for people?
Yeah, that's very important that people know you, because what they're doing is trusting you with their loved ones. So having a rapport with the community is very important. So being involved in things in the community, people getting to know you and trust you is imperative in our business, really.
Well, let's jump right into it and talk about cost, because, you know, that's always going to be relevant for folks to have a sense for how to plan for this. You need to know how much it's going to cost. So, you know, I guess, Charles, could you give me a sense for maybe a range of costs for funerals?
Yeah, at a bottom end, I would say anywhere from $1,500 to $15,000. I mean, there's that big of a gap, depending on whether or not you're actually having a service, whether or not you're going to be cremated, buried, have a viewing, no viewing. I mean, there's so many variables. It's almost like asking how much does a house cost to build. So it's just too many variables, but I can just give you a gap of maybe $1,500 to $15,000.
All right, very good. You know, and I think we've all heard people talking about cremation versus burial. Ralph, can you give me a sense for what you see there? Is there any sort of trend?
Well, there's a definite trend from the traditional funeral of what we're accustomed to when I started in the business. We might have had 1 or 2 cremations a year, and now it's probably 40% cremation, and the predictions are that it'll be over 50% in this area in the near future. So that's a big difference of what we do, and of course we adjust to that, our business, to accommodate the needs and the wants of the people, what they want. We're here to serve what they ask us for.
So let's talk about pre-planned funerals. We were talking about that a little bit ahead of the show, Ralph, and so what do people need to know when they're considering a prepaid arrangement or contract?
Well, first of all, there's been a lot of bad press about prepaid funerals and funeral homes that haven't trusted the money or deposited it in a proper way. But, and there I caution people that you need to know who you're dealing with and do your own due diligence. For example, one needs to follow up to make sure that their money that they've given the funeral home has been deposited in the proper place, and they get their receipt back from that, and that's that part. But there's so many different things with pre-need. You can invest with the life insurance policy, or you can do it with the trust. Some funeral homes use both. We prefer to just use the trust method. And then also protection with the consumer. Also, we have to be audited every year by the state. And we have to have a certified CPA do the audit, okay? And then in order to keep our license renewed for the pre-need, that has to take place. So there is kind of a watchdog out there over the funeral homes, but sometimes it slips through the cracks. So that's why we caution people to do their due diligence and follow up on those things.
Well, and let's stay on this topic for a moment, because I do have a couple of calls on that. So Charles, from Gladwin, someone asking, if I move out of state, can I transfer a prepaid arrangement with me?
Yes, you can do that. And the receiving funeral home, if you were to move out of state, most funeral homes that I know are going to accept the contract as is, the contract that was done in this state. If you moved to another state, the receiving state would accept the contract. But the receiving funeral home has the option of doing the contract as is, or just saying, you know, my prices are different. We're going to just take the money value and do a new contract, and that has to be agreed upon by the family and the new funeral home. But yes, funerals are portable. So the money that is given to the funeral homes is not really retained by the funeral home. As Ralph was saying, it's either held with a trust company or an insurance carrier.
And one more question on that from Sears then, whether you're in state or out of state, I suppose, but is there a way to guarantee that your pre-arrangements won't be changed?
Is there a way? Not really. And the reason I say that is because your next of kin has a legal right to change your wishes, whether not, let's say you adamantly want to be cremated, your next of kin can change their minds and do something different. Now, they would have to pay the difference. And in some cases, if a funeral is irrevocable, which means the money that you've placed into pre-need, if it's irrevocable, that means you have to use the money for your funeral expenses. So a family member couldn't come in and say, yeah, I want to do something cheaper for mom and dad, and I want the money back. If it's irrevocable, they can't do that.
Okay, very good. And then, Ralph, a question from Big Rapids. We're still talking about prepaid arrangements. Is there a way for a low-income person to make a prepaid arrangement without burdening their family?
You could do it on installment payments. That is one way of doing it. So much a month over a certain amount of period till it's, you know, fully funded. That would be one way of doing it. Other than that, that's about the only way I can think of how you do that.
Let me add to that one. He's probably talking through a trust. There's another method through an insurance carrier.
Policy.
Yep, insurance policies where you can do, based on your age, 3, 5, 7, or 10-year payment plans. And the company I use actually doesn't have any health questions, so which is nice, but they do have a 2-year grace period. So as long as you make your payments through the first 24 months, if you die in month 25 or beyond that, you're done paying, and it's taken care of.
Okay, so there are options people can look into. All right, very good. We're asking the funeral home directors, and we're inviting you to call. Again, note that we have a new-ish phone number still, so if you have us on speed dial and you're accustomed to the other number, make a note of that. We also take your questions on social media, and we have one coming in. What if the family cannot afford a funeral? Are there charities to help out in that situation? Charles?
Sure there are. Number one, there's DHS, which is the state that families can go apply, and it's a minimal amount. I mean, it's actually gone down over the years. I remember years ago there was maybe $1,400 there that the state would provide, which that number has dropped down to the 900s. But you know, there's other charities such as hospices that may donate $500, or like a Red Cross. Okay, churches. You know, that's the some that come to mind.
Is that something that you would help with in your capacity to reach out to organizations, or is this something the family would do?
That's something usually done on the family's behalf.
Okay.
You could steer the family toward those groups.
Okay. All right, very good. Now here's a question near and dear to my heart, I have to say, from Morley, because this is one my mom asked years ago. Can a person be buried on their own property in the state of Michigan?
Pretty much no.
That's what we were told too.
Yeah.
That hasn't changed.
Yeah, no. You can bury ashes on your own property. You can, once the disposition is done with cremation, that is the final disposition. So after that point, after cremation has been done, then the family can do whatever they wish with the ashes. You can spread them, you can put them in the backyard, or leave them on your fireplace mantle, or bury them in a cemetery.
Yeah.
Okay.
Ralph says pretty much no, but what he means is that you got to go through a lot of red tape to do it.
So it is now, you opened a door, it is possible.
It is possible, but I think you have to have 1 acre of land designated as a cemetery on your property, and it's
to be
a cemetery forever.
You have to do it endowment, set the money aside, to perpetual care for it. So it's pretty much impossible.
It's a lot of.
So for the average person, the answer is no.
Yeah, that's why governments run cemeteries mostly.
Let's talk for a minute about this time period between when a person passes away and then when you have them at the facility, at the funeral home, and you're beginning to make those arrangements. So what happens in that time frame? People call you. Do you have arrangements with ambulance companies?
Now, what do you mean?
If a person passes away at their home, let's say,
Well, there's different circumstances. If the person is on hospice, your question, I think, is what does the family do when a person dies at home?
Sure.
Okay, so if they're on hospice, comes in, they do their evaluation, and then the hospice then will call the funeral home, and we'll go to the home to pick the person up. If the person is not on hospice and is not under the doctor's care, or hasn't seen a doctor within, 24 hours, then the medical examiner has to be called in before we can make a removal. And once that process has been done, then we can go to the home and make the removal.
All right, very good. We're getting a lot of questions about the prepaid arrangements. So let's talk a little bit more about that. If I pay for a prearrangement, can the funeral home increase the price before you need the services? This is a call from Newaygo.
There's 2 types of prearranged funerals. The one is what I'll call a non-guaranteed price agreement. Basically, there the family is just setting aside funds for goods and services to be selected at a future time. Then the guaranteed price contract is where they specifically purchase services, merchandise, and then that is guaranteed. So they are guaranteed that they do not have to pay any more than what they pay at that initial time of writing the contract.
So they should know going into it which
exactly.
they have.
And there's also a combination of the two, where you can have a guaranteed contract for the things that take place under the roof of the funeral home, such as the goods and services, and the things that happen outside the funeral home, such as your cemetery costs, newspaper costs. Those are the non-guaranteeds.
All right.
Okay.
I'm going to ask each of you this, another question from our social media. In your practice, which is more common, cremation, in-ground burial, or in-wall burial?
Right now, in-ground burial would be more common, and even when they do a cremation, you get the ground burial of ashes too.
What are you seeing on that in a trend? Are people wanting the burial of the ashes, or do they want to, spread them somewhere or dispose of them themselves?
Yeah, I'm seeing in my practice, in my funeral home, I'm seeing a little less than 50% of the cremations I do actually bury them in a cemetery.
That's probably pretty accurate.
You're seeing the same thing? And similar percentages, you mentioned before that cremations are considerably more common than when you began.
Yes.
About 40% now of the services you provide?
Yes.
How high do you expect it will go?
Well, I foresee in the near future that it'll be 60% before too long in this area. Different parts of the country and different parts of the state even vary considerable. Some parts in the east and in the south, cremation is much higher. Even parts of Michigan, certain areas of the state, cremation is up to 70, 80%.
Yeah, and it could be a trend. It could be a situation where people don't want cremation anymore and they start trending back to burials and traditional practices.
Well, and let's talk for a minute about jewelry, because we were talking about that before we came in, and that was interesting. So there are all kinds of jewelry options for family members at the time of, is this always for cremation?
No, not necessarily. You've got a couple different kinds of jewelry. You've got cremation jewelry, which you can put a token amount of ashes inside a pendant that somebody can wear. And you also have what's called the thummies. That's one company where funeral homes will take a thumbprint of the deceased, and that can be made into three-dimensional jewelry, which the survivors can wear. My preference is the thummies, because if you lose a thumbie, you can replace it. If you lose a pendant, you may lose somebody's ashes. So,
Are the thummies becoming more popular?
I think so. They are.
All right, now I have a question from Lakeview. The person has a family plot in New York and wants to know where they should prearrange, New York or Michigan. Charles?
They have a plot, a cemetery
A family plot, it says, in New York.
Okay, well, that would really depend on, I guess, how long they've been in the area. You know, if they've been in Michigan for quite some time, they may want to prearrange the funeral services here, and they could also prearrange some of it in New York as well. You could do both cases, because depending on how you get the body to New York, if it's going to be a full body flown there or ashes sent there, that will vary the difficulty of getting the burial made in New York.
A lot of times it'll be the funeral home that does the bulk of the services. In other words, if the funeral service is going to be done in Michigan, then probably they should do it with their funeral home, their local funeral home. If the services are planned to be mostly in New York, then they should probably do it there.
I agree.
Well, and this is kind of a follow-up question from Manistee. If prearrangement is made in Michigan, but the burial or services are finished in another state, I suppose, let's say New York, is it common or possible that the costs don't match up? How is that settlement made?
Yeah, there is.
Well, yeah, there's going to be a significant difference.
Yeah.
There could very well be a lot of difference. We've done them where, for example, we had one that we did the services here, and then the family took the body down to Arkansas, I think it was, and their costs down there for one day, they had 1 day of viewing, and the burial, the vault, and their costs were 3 times what ours were here for just providing the casket and about 2 hours of visitation.
Yeah. Those are kind of rare circumstances that you're talking about.
But
Well, this might be a rare circumstance too, but it's kind of intriguing. From Lake Station, the question is, can a family make their own casket?
Yes, they can.
Okay.
we've had it done.
Yep. I know he is. I've heard about it. But what you want to be careful on that is the vault you're purchasing is a standard size vault. And you certainly want to talk to the funeral director first before you do that, just to make sure that
Get the dimensions.
the specifications of the casket you're building are going to fit into a standard vault.
Okay,
You don't
very
want to have an issue at the cemetery.
Right, right. From Ubley, is it possible to have visitations and funeral services at someone's home?
Yes.
Yes.
And you make it sound like that's not terribly uncommon? Not a complication?
Nope.
Okay. In Flint, the question is, can I be buried with my wife who has already passed away?
I'm not clear on the question. Do they mean in the same space or in the?
That's all I have.
Yeah.
So let's talk about some
I
options on that.
wonder if she's been cremated.
If they're cremated, that happens quite often. Say the first one passes away and they're cremated. The next one passes away and it's going to be an earthen burial. They can place the ashes in the same casket as that person.
Yeah.
And then, yes, they can be buried together that way. But as far as two bodies in the same casket or the same spot, I don't think that would be practical.
And is there a limit on how many cremated remains can go in a plot?
Some cemeteries have limitations, but most of your township cemeteries around here, there hasn't been any set. 2 is the most common on one space, but there has been, I know of 3 or 4 on one space also.
Right.
But some cemeteries do limit it to 2.
Yeah, I see mostly 2. And I think that may be just for the purposes of headstones and whatnot. I mean, you can only fit so many family names on one headstone.
What is the average cost of cremation, and can you use your own urn? This question coming from Traverse City.
Average cost of cremation, if it's called a direct cremation, those are anywhere from $1,200 to $1,500 to 18, depending on the area that you're in. And the urn, you can put it in a milk jug if you want, yes.
Yeah, families can supply
Do
their
whatever
own
they
urn.
want.
Okay, milk jug or go green. We have another
Yeah.
question coming in on our social media. My grandmother wants to be buried in a green casket. Is this a trend?
Green, okay, we're talking about green burials, perhaps.
Green burials?
Yes. All right, green burials, I'm going to say, are much like a Jewish burial, okay? A green burial is a case where somebody wants to be buried in some type of casket that's biodegradable and will disintegrate over time with the ground. And there are green cemeteries in the state of Michigan. They're far and few between, but I think those are dug by hand. Casket is placed right into the earth and covered up versus a regular cemetery, which requires an outer burial container made of concrete. So the casket would go inside this outer burial container, and that's to keep the ground from having sinkholes and whatnot. So yes, you could do a green burial, but it would have to be done in a green cemetery. And like I said, that's very similar to the Jewish faith and their way of thinking of not embalming the body and going back to the earth.
You know, and that's interesting. You really have to be kind of intercultural experts on some of these things.
Well, even the green burial, there is a way of doing viewing now, because there are fluids, embalming fluids that are made that doesn't have the formaldehyde in, so that it will decompose and will not contaminate the
Is this
earth.
a trend?
I don't see it
I don't
in this
see it.
area.
And where is the closest green cemetery? Well, closest,
I
we
have
cover a
no
huge area.
idea.
Is there any? Are there any that you're aware of in Michigan?
There was one that was
Yeah.
tried to open down by Greenville, but I don't think that ever opened.
Yeah.
And I don't know of any
That's
other ones.
what I was going to say by Greenville, but,
Okay.
But it never
I
opened.
just don't.
Yeah,
I
they
don't
couldn't
see
get the
it
permits and things
happening.
to open it.
From, I think this is Genesee, what happens with the gold in teeth in a cremation or a burial?
You know what, that's interesting. And I talked to one of my suppliers in the business that basically says do not remove people's teeth, even when you're asked, because it's you're removing something physical remains from the body. And when I spoke to my dentist, I asked him literally about the value of gold teeth, and he said that when he removes gold fillings from people's teeth, they throw them in a bucket, and at the end of the year, he takes his staff out to lunch. Now, this is a dentist talking, so I'm thinking they must not be very valuable because they must
there's
do it
not
a
much.
lot.
All right. We only have about 5 minutes left, so the time is whizzing by. Let's try to get to a few more of these questions. From Falmouth, if I'm being cremated, am I cremated alone or with other people?
One at a time. That's the law. And you're given a little tag when it goes into the retort. There's a little tag with a number on it, and then that tag stays with the ashes through the whole process. And that's how they're able to identify that it's the same ashes that went into the.
That's your guarantee.
Okay, very good. And Charles, I'm going to ask you this one from Hemlock because I know you have some services along these lines. What does someone have to do in order to have their pet's ashes buried with them?
Ask the funeral director. That's about it. You know, request it. I mean, we're not going to deny what's put in the casket, and if somebody wants their pet ashes, we'll grant that wish.
And you also offer pet cremation.
Yes, we do. So families that wish to have a private, just like a human remains, if they wish to have their pet cremated privately, we offer that service as well.
And is this something, again, we cover such a huge area, so you're in Mount Pleasant, but if someone is in Detroit or up north, should they check with their funeral director? Is this common that they would help with pet remains?
Yeah, I don't think it's very common.
It's not very common.
That funeral homes get involved with it.
Okay. If a family member dies and some family has to travel, how long can you hold the body for viewing? This question from Claire.
It's pretty much indefinite. 2 to 3 weeks would probably be a good answer to that.
Yeah, if embalming takes place, yes. Yeah, most funeral homes don't have refrigeration units, so once the body's embalmed, yeah, it's, like Ralph said, indefinite.
All right, we have someone from Mount Pleasant curious more about the thummies. How much are they? And if you lose it, do you pay full price to replace it?
Yeah, thumbie cost, I think sterling silver is about $120.
Yeah, it's pretty much-
somewhere in that
pretty much in
neighborhood.
that.
And if they lose it, unfortunately, yes, you would have to pay.
You can have them made out of gold too.
Yep, sterling silver or gold.
All righty. It's common in the military that husbands and wives are buried in the same grave site. So this is just a comment from someone.
Yes, it is. That's absolutely true. I did a burial in Arlington last May, and I asked the director there at the cemetery if the wife had a reserved spot next to her husband, and he said, "Oh no,
on top.
The veteran is buried 7 feet, and the spouse is 5." So
If the spouse or the woman dies first, then she's down below,
That's
and then
right.
the other one's on
First.
Okay, gotcha, very good. We only have a couple minutes left. From Atlanta, do you have to buy a casket for a cremation?
No.
No, you could actually rent one.
Oh, okay.
Well,
And
that's
then-
if you're going to have a
viewing.
viewing. If you're just direct cremation, basically we use what we call a cremation tray. It's a wooden tray with a cardboard top on
Yeah,
it.
that's a minimum container, but I don't know if she's talking if you're going to have a viewing, you don't have
Then
to
that's
purchase
different.
a casket. You can rent one.
Okay. From Flint, why in the state of Michigan do 2 of 3 children have to agree on a cremation service?
It's not 2 or 3. It's the majority of the siblings. First, if it's a husband and wife, the spouse can sign the authorization. And the next one is if there is no spouse, then it's the majority of the siblings.
Or
So if there's 5,
children,
there's
yeah.
3 that have to sign.
That's right.
In the state of Michigan, up until a few years ago, all of the siblings would have had to have signed. And that created a lot of complications. If one of them objected, then there would be no cremation.
All right,
So
very
now
good.
it's a majority.
Well, gentlemen, we are out of time. That went quickly. Thank you for your questions, and thanks to our guests, Ralph Berry with the Berry Funeral Home in Shepherd and Charles Lux with the Charles Lux Family Funeral Home in Mount Pleasant. We really appreciate having you here.
Glad to be here. Thank you.
Fascinating discussion. Thanks also to our phone workers, Walter, Mindy, and Taylor, for taking your questions and getting them over to us. You can also check out our Facebook page, and that is facebook.com/askthespecialist. For some of the questions that we weren't able to get to on air tonight, we'll ask our guests if they can answer some of those for us on Facebook. We invite you to join us next week for Ask the Specialist. Next week we will be asking the veterinarians. I'm Amy Robinson. Good night.